such a wonderful event, and I'm learning so much as an assistant professor, learning more about the history of my department that I've been working at for about almost 3.5 years now. So, but just to quickly introduce myself, I'm originally from Torreneshe, which is out towards Kenta, Arizona. So serving as kind of the moderator, the coordinator for the student posters. Today we have about 5 posters, and many of the posters are coming from our Native Policy and Community Building course. So we believe that these posters are very important in order to showcase the type of work that's generated from our graduate students. And we've designed what we call a Project of Excellence initiative. And the Project of Excellence is a really distinctive element of the Native American Studies program, in which we encourage students to go in and learn more about a community issue. So today, I actually have a big charge for everybody in this room. We actually created these community input forms. So as these individuals, I don't know if Leola and Lonnie and Lloyd can come up and help distribute these, but each of our students have provided a community input form, because we also have the added benefit of students coming in from all parts of the country. We do have one of our students who's calling in from Washington, D.C. But in terms of this work, we do want you to think about their research question, give them some input, their perspectives and their ideas there. So I'm going to go ahead, and Erla's calling through my cell phone, so I'll go ahead and have her do the introduction of her work, and each of you guys get about 10 minutes to do your presentation. And Erla, just so you know, Catherine has your poster showcased on the projector, the screen, okay?
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon, Yahzee. My name is Cheryl Yahzee, and I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. I'm a graduate student here with the Native American Studies program. I'm currently living in Washington, D.C., where I work as the membership coordinator for the National American Indian Housing Council. My clans are Tango clan, that's my mother's clan, and I'm born for Folded Arms. My maternal grandfathers are the Wandering People, or commonly known as the Mexican clan, and my paternal grandfathers are the Salt clan, and that's how I identify myself as a Navajo woman. So, as a graduate student for the NAS program, my professors had asked me to conduct a research project on a topic that is relevant to my community. So I had chosen to focus on our youth, while also challenging the idea of punitive punishment. This had me aim to work on a project that answered the following research question: how can the Navajo Nation promote the use of peacemaking circles within the juvenile criminal justice system? With this project, I wanted to promote cultural revitalization and community building within the Chinle Agency on the Navajo Nation. My project focuses on understanding underlying challenges that the Navajo Nation government might face while working toward creating a restorative justice method in peacemaking circles. With my project, my main mission is to create traditional and holistic solutions for criminal behavior conducted or seen through our young Navajo men and boys. With my poster, I've highlighted 5 articles that I've used as supportive evidence toward my project, which claims that traditional methods like peacemaking circles will benefit sovereignty and self-determination within tribal governments like the Navajo Nation. For my 5 articles, I've utilized articles and books as well, and they all aim towards identifying ways and suggestions to the Navajo Nation on how peacemaking circles would promote and benefit the Navajo people and their ability to self-govern. And so my articles are pretty long, but just to break it down into something that would be easy for everyone to understand, The first article, it really identifies the approval and desire from the Navajo Nation and from all tribal nations that peacemaking programs would be beneficial to juvenile court systems. The second article talks a lot about understanding the three concepts and foundational laws from the Navajo Nation, and this book highlights the importance of relationship and kinship, while also suggesting to the Navajo Nation that children are just as equal as adults. So these restorative methods would promote not only for adults but also for children in the criminal justice system. The third article is talking about the positive shift that can be observed in utilizing these types of programs, and it highlights the purpose of peacemaking circles, which is to build a better future. My fourth article explains a lot about the cultural relevance within a group which utilized sweat lodge ceremony and their approach to using this as a method of group therapy. And this article really promotes group cohesiveness and bonding, and it gives evidence to why peacemaking circles could encourage cultural practices while also promoting and conducting healing processes within tribal nations. For my last article, it identifies barriers, some of the things that the Navajo Nation might face or come upon, and it really encourages the Navajo Nation to understand the overall community building that can come from peacemaking circles within the juvenile court system. And then it also defines a shift from powering a government to punish into a government that has the power to heal. And so it's a little under construction right now, but this is why I've wanted to present this project to everyone, and your feedback is greatly appreciated, whether you're a student, a non-native, a professor, or a parent. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, and Professor Gray Eyes will be assisting me in obtaining this feedback from you. So if you would like to, you can answer the 10 questions that are on the form that's being handed out. Each of those questions are completely optional, so I won't be upset if anyone left any questions unanswered. So thank you so much for your time, and have a good day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erla. I really appreciate it. So on the left corner there, you'll see the poster for Erla. So if you want to, during lunch break, get a little more in-depth information, you're able to go over and check it out if you want. I'd like to call Zunaba Martin next to talk about her project, and I'm going to switch the screen out while you're doing this.
Yeah, it's A. Just checking to make sure everyone's awake. Yeah, it's A. Benishik A. Doshidine. She A. Ya Zanaba Arita Martin Unisha. Sanabithin Ishne. Nakai Bashishin. Tobandashinale. Adosh Adene Doshiche. Fusligai Nasha. Nadi Nakish Nahai. Akut Ego A. As Zanin Ishne. Shima A. Simatsu Jamar Enolia. Shija A. Bobby Martin Enolia. Shimasina A. Eloise Johnson Enolia. Shiche A. Sunny Jim Molia and De. Shanella Astan A. Mary Chris Martin Enolia. Shanella Hasteen A. Edward Martin Enolia. My name is Zanaba Martin. I am a member of the Navajo Nation. I am also a member of the Modoc tribe. My clans are Sleeping Rock. I am born for Mexican, Chicana, or Aztec and Mayan ancestry. My paternal grandfather is of the Edgewater clan, and my late maternal grandfather is of the Modoc tribe. I am also part African American, Irish, and German on both of my maternal grandparents' side. I am here today to talk about my research that I've been conducting that I started in my undergraduate studies, which is similar to addressing how Indigenous knowledge can address climate change issues. I am an environmentalist. I am also a filmmaker, and this is just something that I wanted to continue with my undergraduate studies. I do have a bachelor's degree with my major was Southwest Studies, and I had a double minor in Film and Media Studies as well as Indigenous Studies. And I was really excited to be accepted into the Native Studies program here at UNM because all my 4 years at the Colorado College, which is also known as the Ivy League of the West, they didn't have any of this available for Native students, for the Native community, for Native faculty and staff. There was no Native Studies department, there was no program, there was no student services for Indigenous students. And so my 4 years, I didn't have the privilege to just be a student, go to classes and study and do homework. I was out there advocating, having meetings with the college president, meeting with all the, everyone that, a lot of others wanted to have this change. So my last year, my senior year, we finally had the Indigenous Studies minor created, and that was how I got that minor. Right, and so...
One more second, there's something wrong with the...
Okay, I'll just talk about a little of what I'm doing with my research project. So again, my main focus has been to connect environmental issues such as environmental health, environmental injustices, environmental racism, ecocide, connecting that directly to the same issues that our Indigenous peoples are facing, from genocide, from our health issues, from, let's say, resource extraction and uranium mining, all of these issues that are impacting our health. And from my research, I kind of coined the term socio-natural trauma, which again, it ties in both of the traumas that our environment faces, as well as our Indigenous peoples. And for my project, the community that I'm working with is back home on the reservation. I am from the community of Tuflagai, and I'm a voting member of the Bastla Twin Lakes chapter, but I set out to interview different Native women, Navajo women, who have this Indigenous knowledge, who are trying to make these same connections that I've been seeking to make. So socio-natural trauma, and addressing that, is also the term socio-natural health and healing. So with the Navajo way of life, with our identity, our culture, our language, our environmental ethics and teachings about being caretakers of the land is kind of what I want to focus on for the next 3 semesters. I am in the second cohort of the UNM NAS MA program, so this is, I just appreciate everyone that's helped me get this far. So as an environmentalist, I didn't really want to print on paper that's coming from trees, but I do have little smaller papers. If you want to submit your community input, I would really appreciate it. I also, if you take a look up here on the poster back there is a link to a Google form online if you want to fill that out instead of using a paper. And I'm just pulling up my poster here so I can see it as well. And so again, I had the chance to study abroad with our relatives in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that's kind of where I saw how they have so much awareness and so much public education about saving the environment, about living the zero waste movement, about revitalizing permaculture and reclaiming our Indigenous knowledge. For those that don't know, permaculture was a term that was coined by 2 white guys. And what they did to get that information is they took all this knowledge from Indigenous peoples and claimed it as something that they produced. So part of my own lifestyle is reclaiming the zero waste lifestyle. I'm actually one of 10 Earth Ambassadors for Unity this year, and so we are promoting our communities to do something for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which is this coming April. But again, I kind of am tying that into my research to reclaim our Indigenous knowledge, to say we have these answers, whether starting from the grassroots level all the way up. We have these answers to address why is there so much pollution? Why is our people still getting cancer from, abandoned uranium mines? There's over 500 abandoned uranium mines on our reservation back home. And that's just uranium. There's so much with coal, there's so much other, so I've had the opportunity to document a lot of this movement that's happening back in my community. So again, my title right now is Healing from Socio-Natural Trauma in Dinepikea. I am from, again, Toflagai, and my family and I have revitalized gardening and composting and taking care of all of our livestock for almost 9 years, I want to say now. So the picture in the top corner, at the very top, is my youngest baby sister. I'm the oldest of 4 daughters. But she's touching like one of our corn gardens, and there's a lot of teachings with our corn stalk, so that's why I included that picture. And I also wanted to dedicate, my work to not only, our ancestors, our current people, the future, our environment, but, one of my late mentors was Dr. Larry Emerson, and I just admired the work he did, the lifestyle he was living, about saving water, about, not using, having to flush so much water, using toilets, trying to go back old school. And so, I shared this quote from him, and it says, there is growing evidence of indigenous people as environmental refugees trying to escape catastrophic disruption caused by environmental degradation. And then just the other picture says, we are not defending nature, we are nature defending itself. So again, I'm trying to ask my community members, to make that connection again. What happens to Mother Earth, the destruction, the pollution, all of that is impacting our people. And if it hasn't yet, that's what climate change is. It's going to happen sooner or later. And so my research question, the main one is, how can the Dene way of life promote healing from socio-natural trauma that is occurring in Dinepikea? And the way I define Dinepikea, or the way it's been described to me, is it goes beyond the current borders of the Navajo Reservation, because we do have 2 of our main 4 sacred mountains in the state of Colorado, but our reservation borders do not extend into the state of Colorado. So when I define Dinepikea, I'm talking about our ancestral homeland, so it does expand into those 4 states of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona. And then just some of the other things I want to examine, given with our history, I love learning about our history, is examining why does socio-natural trauma exist, where did it start, and again, that ties back into looking at intergenerational trauma and historical trauma, not only for human beings, but for other species as well. So the trauma of our trees, of our plants, of our different animals, that's kind of what the socio-natural concept I'm trying to focus on my research. And I also want to examine, what does the socio-natural relationship look like in Dinepikea? How and what does the Dene way of life heal? And why is revitalizing our Dene way of life necessary for the socio-natural healing process? And again, I do have a background in public health as well as environmental advocacy, so I really just want to work with my community to find these solutions, to make these connections so we can address these issues. So if you want to learn more, I'm happy to share my contact info, but again, my poster's back there, and I will have my laptop set out as well if you want to fill out the online Google form, I think during the lunch period. But thank you everyone, and yeah.
All right, so I'm going to ask Cheryl Yahzee to come up and talk about her presentation, and I will rush back over there and switch it out.
So good morning and good afternoon all at the same time. Cheryl Yahzee Ashi Nashont with the Chitney Bushes Chin, Topahe Edash Chedo, Shastane Edashanale, Torgilete, Shiaho, Ado Torgilete, Shashanab Kinged, added the Neb Banash National, Ado could the University of New Mexico, they Yahe Inchtra, the online Inchtra, Leh Wando Inchtra. The neck at Yahe Yahe Nas by and Shia. Hello everybody, my name is Cheryl Yahzee. I'm from the Salt Clan, born for the Bitterwater people. My maternal grandparents are from the Water Edge people, and my paternal grandparents are from the Bear Clan. I was born and raised in, well, I was born in Albuquerque, but I was raised in Tuajale, and I still reside there. My 3 children still live there as well, and I go to school here at the University of New Mexico. And so my project of excellence is about language revitalization. How many of you are part of the Navajo Nation? How many of you speak Navajo? Good. So half of the people that raised their hand for a second time. So that's something that we want to seriously address. And so indigenous languages all across the world are going extinct. And according to research, they're going extinct every 14 days, which means that priceless words are disappearing along with fluent speakers. And also with that loss, we're losing sacred songs, sacred prayers, and sacred ceremonies. And we don't have any more time to lose. It's time to become active in trying to revitalize our languages. It doesn't matter what indigenous community you come from, it is important that we begin to revitalize our languages. So my project is called Saad Language Nest. And that is in conjunction with my graduate school mentor, Dr. Tiffany Lee, who is the Director of Native American Studies, and 5 other individuals. One of them is Mary Whitehair Frazier, and the other one is Warlance Chi, and Melvatha Chi, and Vincent Warito. So there's 6 of us that are working in a group to create and establish the first language nest with Navajo language, and it is to provide the Nebazad environment instruction focused on Diné infants, toddlers, and prenatal, to sustain the Diné cultural practices and knowledge, and create a Diné language teacher pipeline, and to reclaim the Nebazad to ensure its longevity and provide a solution for the lack of Diné Teaching Center in Bezdidasanid, which is here in Albuquerque. And there's a lot of people that are from Tojule and other areas that live in Albuquerque that could benefit from this as well. So in my project, it's called Saad Kadilye. So Saad is language and Kadilye is planting. So what we want to do is we want to begin to plant the language, our Navajo traditional language, into prenatal mothers, newborns, and infants. So we are, in my little rendition of a corn, I have Netsakas, which is thinking, which is in the thinking phase. Now we thought about what the problem area lies within language revitalization, what we can do to bring the language back to our people. Now I think we're in the second phase, which is Nahat'ah, which is planning. Now we're planning on what the logistics are. Now we're planning on what the licensure requirements are, what the regulations are within the state of New Mexico. And then how we can bring it to all 110 chapters. And even the satellite communities. I live in one of 3 satellite communities, which is Tojule. There's Tojule, Tistok, which is Alamo, and Trochin, which is Rema. And although contrary to popular belief where they tell us that we're enemy Navajos, but we were on the front lines while everybody went back to the main homeland. So I always want to point that out every time when I have to get up and speak. And so, and the next phase would be Ina, which is the establishment of the program. That's bringing life to your project, that's bringing life to your language. You're bringing that heartbeat back to it. And the goals are to immerse children in their language, to saturate their day in their native tongue, to provide fluent speakers to our next generations. And studies show that fluent speakers excel in their academic life. So test scores show that. In Tojule, they started an immersion program 3 years ago. And in the first year, the test scores improved from fall, and in their spring, it rose and it jumped up quite a bit. And it provides a strong cultural sense of self. self-esteem and self-confidence. It builds a kinship relationship. Everywhere you go, you have relatives there. Everywhere in every state that you travel to, you're going to run into somebody that's related to you within the clan system, not necessarily within your bloodline, but within your clan system. So you'll always have a sense of belonging to wherever you're going, and you'll always have family. And it helps them navigate between two worlds. It helps them problem solve, and it helps them overcome challenges. And it also gives them a sense of belonging to community, and it provides a strong cultural sense of identity. And it also gives them, I don't want to say pride, but it also gives them a part of being part of a community and having a larger network of having family wherever you go. So wherever you go, even if you go to school abroad, even if you go to school across the country, you're still going to have family. You're still going to be tied to your land. You're still going to be tied to whatever indigenous nation, whatever indigenous territory that you're in. Because remember, the United States is built on stolen land. So wherever you step, wherever you go, that is indigenous land. And I have a survey here. This was created by the group. So I think this is probably like its 4th edition right now. But if you could fill it out, and also there's some questions on my poster as well about community input and other techniques, or just feedback on what I have. There's a lot of literature on language immersion, but there's not a lot of literature on language nest itself, because nest is where we're starting. We're gonna impart the language. We're gonna feed the little babies the language so they can grow up, and when they fly the nest, that they'll always return to that nest and remember the language that was implanted and imparted into their lives when they were just babies, or even in the prenatal sense when their mother can talk to them, or learning the language and things like that. So, okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, these are some amazing projects. I'm really excited about it. So we have one more presentation. I'd like to ask Shantika and Kira here. And I think her poster is way down there. So, and her survey doesn't actually have a label on it, but it's in a big 14 font. So if you guys could check out her survey.
Hello, I'm Shantika Imker, and I am new relatively to this area. My family is from Mississippi, down around Jackson and to the south of that. I grew up during the 50s and 60s when segregation was key, before the civil rights movement. I grew up in a black community in Jackson, Mississippi. Although the black communities in general had lower income, lower educational level, and generally lower socioeconomic status. One thing that was significant for the African American community that came out of that particular situation was the strength and character that was taught by the elders of the community. I remember my mom told me when I was about 6 or 7 that since I was a black girl, it would be impossible for me to just get along on my looks or some of the other characteristics that people who were not in the African American community do. And she said, but remember, that education is the key. What you have in your head can't be removed. So what you think about yourself, how you picture yourself, where your identity is what will get you through. Most of my people were either spiritual leaders or educators. And that's where I came about on my love for education. I retired several years ago from a career as a computer systems analyst. Now, as a child, I always wanted to be a doctor. So after that time, I decided to came to Albuquerque, and I decided to pursue my degree in health education. So I'm now a master's candidate in health education. I used to be a forest person. Growing up in Mississippi, in the pine tree belt, and then moving to California, where I took refuge in the redwood forest, took refuge in their height and their ability to shelter. When my husband told me that he wanted to go to the desert, I said, there's nothing there. However, when I came to Albuquerque, I realized that there is another side to the refuge that I felt. Instead, I felt here that my soul expands to encompass the rest of the system, universal system that is here.
Hold on a second. Makes a big difference. Yes, so from that experience, I recognized that this particular terrain offers a different type of spirituality. And I recognized that the people who had lived here all of these years had developed culture that encompassed that terrain and engaged them as a part of the entire system here. I was disappointed, however, when I talked to a number of people about the conditions that are currently here, especially conditions surrounding the increased energy development and what was happening to the environment as well as the health of the people. When you examine the energy industry all over the world and throughout its history, the one thing that you see is that the industry, the extraction of the resources from the earth disengages that connection that we naturally have with the rest of the environment. It destroys that connection. Now, normally, an ecosystem will be able to recover. Now, this system is the product of how many, 7 billion years? It can recover, however, it can't recover at the rate that the industry destroys it. And at the rate we're going, what we're going to do is create an environment where that is antagonistic to life itself.
and we will again approach extinction like the human group did approximately 70 million years ago. So my project is to get together with people who have lived in this environment and to join in the dialogue that's already going on about health effects and about what can be done about it. We would like to take those conversations and develop them into policy positions that can be argued, that will allow the energy industry to take responsibility for the damage to the environment and to the health, especially of local people, that is available now.
And Shantika has one survey out there as well.
Sorry I was late. I just came back from Keynote Address. Yahzee she Nicholas Hardy in share, Kiara in Shun, Socio the Gassichi, Tony Chini Gassiche, the Beth Jim Tashinella. Hello, I'm Nicholas Hardy. I'm from Keynote, Arizona, and I'm in the Masters of NAS. And what I want to talk about very briefly is about mental health. And the purpose of this is to hopefully connect the Navajo way of life or traditional lifestyle to a youth. And the purpose of this is to find our self-identity. Also, be aware of your surroundings. And the reason why I don't like mental health is because I know many issues. And just recently we had a tragic event in the family, and this makes me want to push more for it. And the reason why I want to do mental health is because I dislike seeing our youth going through, social phobias, family disruptions, cultural conflicts, social disorganizations. And I've always had questions on how can we, show the youth how important it is to know about mental health awareness, and how can we help them understand it more, and also is there a new sustainable way of understanding it? And I wanted to share a quote by Dr. Nathaniel Burden. He's an American-Canadian psychotherapist, and I'm all about self-esteem. And so his quote is, "Self-esteem is not a luxury, it is a profound spiritual need." And the reason why I like that is because, I just wanted to show, basically research on showing the youth, showing the values and principles of your indigenous identity. And, by building, and purpose of this, by building a new mental program, or maybe an event. I usually had like a suggestion last year was basically sheep camp, but who knows how that will. And also, I wish we could continue spreading this message, because I'm pretty sure a lot of us know, youth going through mental illness. And by that, I believe gaining many supporters for this would be cool. From the IHS, the health department, and other organizations that run health programs around the whole reservation. And my lib review, I got motivation from this from Dr. Lee's book, "The Critical Issues in Indigenous Studies." Just basically, knowing the importance of your identity, and that's where he brought me with my Hajon, my Ket, and then also Cordova's book as well, How It Is. It's just basically, she explores new roles of the culture, and she basically wants to tell us basically visual everything differently. And I always I'm a visual learner, so I always want to visual something different. And I always wanted to share, my personal story, my experiences, and a lot of us gone through different eras, and I'm pretty sure many of us new students in this cohort, know many issues nowadays, and it's pretty sad that I know like a lot of kids that passed away back at home because mental illness, they've been bullied, cyberbullied, they don't want to talk to their moms or anyone, and basically there's these pictures, the far right on the bottom, that's me living the traditional Navajo way of life, my lifestyle, and I've always never tried to down myself, only because my motivation, my great grandma, and she always kept me busy, putting me to work, planning, going sheep herding and all that, and I always wanted to know is there another way we can sustain this mental health awareness? And I just have basic questions. Just do you think my research is important and relevant? And do you think the background supports my research questions? Do you think the literature review shows the need of this type of this research? And also there's a community I want to work with, which is NACA, but I'm trying to work with the OSD, the out of school time program. I volunteered over there as well. And those kids over there remind me of myself as a little reservation kid, and the way they talk, they're cool, they're beautiful accents, and this motivated me more, and I hope I get to work with them on this project. And you got to start somewhere at least, and hopefully I can carry this experience on back to the reservation, because I'm planning on going back to the reservation in Keynote, Arizona, or any other community, and help and give back, give back to the community. And that is all. Sorry I was late, by the way. So.
Well, thank you, everybody. And Nicholas does have a survey circulating around, so if you guys could fill that out. I just want to also point out that it takes a lot of courage to come up and speak here, especially for our students. So I'm really proud of the students within our courses, but also, Nicholas, thank you for coming and making it, and we're very proud of you. So thank you for your research and your work. As you guys go through lunch, you have a few minutes within the hour. Please visit the posters and provide the feedback to the students. Otherwise, we'll collect the surveys that if you want to leave it on your table, we'll come around and collect them. But I really appreciate the work of these wonderful students, and I just want to give them a round of applause. So that's it.
More acknowledgements. One is our Vice President for Student Affairs, Cheryl Torres, is here. If you could wave, I know you're in conversation. Thank you for being here. And I also want to recognize our students. If there's any current Native American Studies students, undergrad, online, master's degree, please stand. Show us yourselves. I know we have a lot of alumni here too. Our alumni are really doing some amazing things.
Woo!
We have
Yeah.
So if you can
You and
stand,
that.
it'd be really
Almost.
right on. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Melanie Yahzee, who will introduce our fabulous keynote.
Right. Yat shik'el shidna'a. She'e Melanie Yahzee nisha. Bilagana nishle ma aveshkijni bashishchin. Bilagana dasha Cheryl Twotsani dasha mala. Behalge de masha kut adalne nishle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melanie Yahzee. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Native American Studies and American Studies here at UNM. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker for this event, Dr. Roxane Dunbar Ortiz. There's a long list of things that I need to say about Roxane to introduce her. So Roxane is a professor emerita of ethnic studies at California State University. She is a prominent historian of colonialism and Native American studies in the United States. She is the author or editor of 16 books, most famously, as many may know in this room, The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, published in 2015, and also an American Book Award winner. From 1978 to 1981, Roxane was the visiting coordinator of Native American Studies here at UNM, and prior to that time, she was also a prominent figure in the American Indian movement. The rise of Kiva Club, for example, right in the 60s and 70s, which then created Native American Studies out of that student activism, was part of the Red Power movement that the American Indian movement belonged to. And so Roxane belongs to that tradition here in the Southwest and more broadly. More recently, she was awarded the Cultural Freedom Award by the Lannan Foundation in 2017. And just last year, in 2019, Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States was converted into a youth book. It has now won dozens of awards and is now being taught in classrooms all over the country. I myself teach this book in all of my Native American Studies courses. It's a touchstone text for my intro to Native American Studies courses, and without it, we would be bereft, I think, those of us who teach in Native American Studies, of being able to make connections about settler colonialism, indigenous resistance, the influence of the doctrine of discovery on federal Indian policy, etc., for our students to help to understand those connections. I think something that's really exciting also is that apparently Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States is also going to be turned into an HBO miniseries, which is really exciting for popular education. That's right, we should clap for that. Inside and outside of the classroom. I really can't overstate how much this particular book has pushed back against the stereotyping and the racist portrayals of Native people in what constitutes American history or US historiography, and how instrumental it has been in telling an indigenous history of colonialism, resistance, and resilience in the so-called United States in university classrooms, high school classrooms, middle school classrooms, and now the public will be able to access these arguments through this HBO miniseries. So I'd just like to welcome Roxane Dunbar Ortiz to come up here. Let's give her a round of applause.
Can you hear me? Good. If I stray away, just yell at me. Get closer to the microphone. Well, we're gathered here at the University of New Mexico, Albuquerque, on land that was stolen from the Pueblos of Isleta and Sandia. I want to thank the Native American Studies Department for inviting me to present the Keynote Address on the 50th anniversary of Native American Studies at UNM. Thanks especially to Professor Cheryl Yahzee for her hard work for organizing the symposium, as well as Delia. Paloma, is Delia here? He did a great job taking care of logistics. And thanks to the Native American Studies faculty and students for taking Native American Studies into the future. Native American Studies at UNM is dear to my heart. I was interim coordinator for 2 years, 1978 to 80, and technically on to 81, but I was on an NEH, so not here. So I was present for 2 years. Only 8 years after it was founded by Native students. I took leave from my faculty position in Native American Studies at California State University to assist in strengthening the academic component. And I had intended to stay only 1 year, but ended up staying 2 years when we found Ted Hohola, as he told, I kind of almost kidnapped him, to take the reins, and I returned to California. One of my goals when I came, in New Mexico, they tend to hire, if they hire Native Americans, to hire Native people from Oklahoma or someplace else. And I was determined to find a New Mexico Native person that would be permanent here. And Ted served immensely well, as did all of the others after who are Native New Mexico. It was an amazing 2 years working with and learning from hundreds of Pueblos, Diné, and Apache students, and working with the All-Indian Pueblo Council as well as the Diné and Mescalero nations. I had written my 1974 doctoral dissertation at UCLA on the history of land tenure in New Mexico, and it was published as a book in 1980. I had to do it short. So this is a newer edition of the original book. This is a picture by Morris Chino, I think is here, artist from Acoma, of the genocide of Acoma. when the Spanish returned and the feet that were cut off. So that book is what guided me in my work here as well. And it happened to be also the tricentennial of the All-Indian Pueblo Revolt of 1680. And the Tricentennial Commission of the revolt, which was headed by Herman Agoyo, selected the book as one of the official publications of the Tricentennial, and it was presented with me present at a ceremony at Taos Pueblo. I still consider this the most important honor I have ever received. It was very hard to leave when the time came, and I return every chance I get. I have observed how Native American Studies at UNM has developed over the decades, although I learned so much from the panel this morning that filled in the blanks I didn't know about. It has grown steadily with a hiatus of setbacks, and then steamed ahead after that in the last 15 years. And this dedicated leadership and the dedication of the students is what really did it, because the institutional support here and in most places where there are Native American studies is very sketchy, and that's a sort of a weak way to put it. They're often just trying to get rid of it. So now it is a prestigious department with a brilliant faculty and students, and also intertwined with other departments, especially American Studies. Nick Estes is in American Studies, Jeanette DiNatale. So I salute the alumni and current faculty and students who have contributed to this process, and especially the unique student organization, the Kiva Club, founded in 1952. During my tenure here, the Kiva Club students were my greatest support on campus. So it's just amazing. I think maybe the Kiva Club is the first Native American students organization, maybe in the world, 1952. In my talk today, I'm responding to some penetrating questions that Dr. Melanie Yahzee suggested I address. And I really appreciate them because it gave me a sense of how I might organize what I had to say into a coherent talk. So first, I'll tell a bit about the history of the field of Native American Studies in general and what brought me to the field. Secondly, my time as a coordinator of Native American Studies at UNM. And third, what I've seen change or stay the same in the field of Native American Studies over the decades. And fourth, the importance of Native American Studies at UNM to the whole field of Native American Studies. And of course, finally, and I'm hoping in discussion that this will, be a main part of it. What are the pressing issues for the field of Native American Studies as we continue? So I'll attempt to cover all of these excellent queries in my allotted time, and hopefully we will have ample time for discussion. So first, the history of the whole field of Native American Studies. I haven't written a history. I wrote a memoir that included my experience, but I refer you to Elizabeth Cook Lynn, who has written and published a lot on, and I take some of this history from her work. So in 1970, a number of leading Native American scholars met at Princeton University for 4 days at what they call the first convocation of American Indian scholars, including Dr. Alfonso Ortiz from San Juan Pueblo, who had completed his doctoral dissertation in anthropology at Princeton and was teaching there. Also, Dr. Scott Monday who had just received the Pulitzer Prize for his novel, House Made of Dawn. Others participating included Vine Delory Jr., historian Roger Buffalohead, sculptor and painter Fritz Scholder, anthropologist Beatrice Medicine, and many others. They called for the development by Native scholars of indigenous knowledge and called specifically for, quote, the development of Native American studies as an academic discipline. I believe that was the first time that that was pronounced as a goal. Before that was student services and other things that were developing in the 60s. Dr. Elizabeth Cook Lynn wrote about the convocation, I'm quoting her. This milestone event set the agenda for strategy discussions that would bring about a change in the way Native life in America was studied. The main aim of these discussions was to assert that Indians were not just the inheritors of trauma, but were also the heirs to vast legacies of knowledge about the continent and the universe that have been ignored in the larger picture of European invasion and education. So they had a very large picture at that convocation. I would love to have been there, or wish it had been filmed. At that time, 1970, I wasn't even aware of Native American studies, that it was in the process of being created. I knew only about Black studies and Chicano studies. What brought me to the field in 1974, I've dated back, I'm a historian, so I always go back, like 10,000 years or so, but I go back to when I was 18, and in my first year of college at the University of Oklahoma. This was 1956, 57. Yes, I'm that old. It was there that I learned about European colonialism of Africa, Asia, the Pacific and Caribbean, and the American continents from a Palestinian petroleum engineering student who was my engineering student boyfriend's best friend. I learned through the prism of the expulsion of Said's family from their home in Jaffa only 8 years earlier. Said had the key to their house. Said was in his third year of Oklahoma University and had traveled around the state. He observed that what the United States had done to Indians is what was happening to Palestinians. I married the boyfriend and dropped out of college to work and support us. Said was still there for 2 more years, always visiting the whole family, my husband's family. He was sort of his second family while he was in Oklahoma. My husband's sister was very politically radical and voracious reader and handed me each book she read, much of it about colonialism and U.S. imperialism. I was glued to the television watching United Nations meetings in which former British colonies in Africa were taking their seats as independent states. I also watched intensely the televised revolution taking place in Cuba, which came to victory January 1st, 1959. We moved to San Francisco in 1960, where I enrolled at San Francisco State, which was roiling with organizing to support Black civil rights movement in the South, and was active on many fronts. I got involved in investigating redlining of housing and other things. But I was shocked that these activists, leftists, were enthusiastic about Israel. Of course, they knew nothing white. It was very white at the time, although Malcolm X did come and speak during that time. But they took trips to Israel. They were very supportive. They loved the kibbutz system. And these were, not all Jewish people. There was all the leftists. And they were totally uninterested in the Palestinian situation or national liberation movements. So I felt a little bit like a unicorn, among them. But I was learning other things from them. I wanted to major in history, and I was required to take a course in U.S. history and one in Western civilization, both of which I hated. I made A's, but I hated them. And I almost was about to drop out of history, but then I took a course in world history. And I found what I was looking for, The History of European Colonialism, in a book from the 1930s titled World History by P.T. Moon, the most influential book of my life, because it was about colonialism, all about colonialism. The whole book was about European colonialism from the point of view of colonies. The other thing is that the professor, Theodore Treutlein, had been a student. He'd gotten his PhD at UC Berkeley. And in the 1950s and 40s and 50s, UC Berkeley was the center of Latin American studies with Sherburne Cook, historian Woodrow Wilson Bora, geographer Carl Sauer, who wrote about Native peoples too. And they were called the Berkeley School of Latin American History, so that's what he came out of. So he taught the course as History of Colonialism, but about half the course was on the history of Spanish and U.S. colonialism in California. So this was the first time I had an opportunity to engage, and it just, changed my whole thinking. Sherburne Cook, I don't know if you've read my Indigenous Peoples History, I quote him a lot because he was the demographer, and very early on, he claimed that there had been 100 million people in the Western Hemisphere when others were saying 10 million. This undercount of Native people. He's been proven right since then, and also that North America was far more densely populated than the estimates. So this is my introduction to Native American studies, which did not yet exist, of course. I entered history graduate school at UCLA in 1964, specializing in Latin American history. I went to UC Berkeley for a year, but Latin American had left and went to UCLA. But I did learn a lot about Europe that year. So I learned in greater detail, and had to take exams on it, and oral and written and everything else, about Spanish and Portuguese colonization and slavery, as well as about 19th and 20th century U.S. imperialism in Latin America. But nothing about the indigenous peoples. When I would object, professors and even grad students, even my friends alike, would advise me to transfer to anthropology. But I had taken one anthro course at San Francisco State and thought it was ridiculous, probing the sexual mores of Polynesians. So in the spring of 1966, at the end of my second year, after I passed written exams for the doctorate, I was a teaching assistant in the first course on African American history at UCLA. It was taught by Ronald Takaki, the late Ronald Takaki, Hawaiian of Japanese descent, with a newly minted doctorate. He spoke to me of his idea of creating a new academic field of what he called ethnic studies that would include African American, Chicano, Native American, and Asian American fields. He was not renewed for his second year. That is, he was fired for being too radical. Black Panthers were attending the class, and that was not acceptable. This was like the same year as the Watts uprising in central Los Angeles. 2 years later, he was hired at UC Berkeley in history, and with black students and Asian students and Native American students demanding courses and departments, he led in establishing the first Department of Ethnic Studies. And I decided that was what I wanted to do instead of history. But I had a little hiatus here. In 1968, I abandoned graduate school, burned all my bridges, dissertation unwritten for 5 years to be a revolutionary. And I helped found a radical anti-imperialist women's group. I traveled around the country speaking and organizing against the Vietnam War and against racism, against interventions in Africa and so forth. And in 1973, I joined the American Indian Movement in San Jose, California. while I was in law school. And I was on the Bay Area American Indian Movement Council in San Francisco. The UCLA History Department sent a little delegation persuading me to return and finish my dissertation. I know, you know, the affirmative action, the title, the funding that went to universities for how many minority students they had. They were having problems in the history department, and they needed a woman graduate. So I agreed, but I stipulated that I wanted to write on the history of land tenure in New Mexico. That's another story why I got interested in that. So I submitted the dissertation in August 1974 and took a position teaching Native American Studies at California State University at Hayward in the Bay Area. CHUH Native American Studies was created pretty early, 1970, by Native students, and under the leadership of a Stanford graduate student, Ms. Lumbee, Dr. Dean Shavers, who was completing his doctoral dissertation, and he recruited me to replace him. He was finishing it, and he had been offered a position as president of Back Home College, an all-Indian school in Oklahoma, which he went to. But he had already developed the curriculum, and everything was set up, you know, for me to take over. I created more courses. It was really wonderful. My whole 40 years of teaching there, I was able to create all my own curriculum when I taught. Not many people get to do that. Whatever was on my mind at the time, you know, I got to make a course out of it. Well, Vine Gloria Jr. came into my life and persuaded me to be an expert witness at the December 1974 treaty hearing in Lincoln, Nebraska. I resisted, telling him I knew nothing about that history, that I specialized in Spanish colonization and only U.S. colonization of the former Spanish colonies, that in the Southwest. He gave me an armload of books and documents and said he thought I could be a quick study. So, what we called the treaty hearing was a motion to dismiss all the criminal charges against Wounded Knee participants, some 300 charged with misdemeanors and felonies, mostly Lakota or Dakota, but many from other nations, as well as Black, Chicano, and white allies. The argument the defense presented was based on the 1868 Sioux Treaty with the United States that stipulated that anyone who committed crimes on the reservation were under Native jurisdiction. They could turn them over if they wanted to the feds, but they didn't have to. So I ended up being on the defense team even, and in addition to being one of several expert witnesses. But most of the dozens of witnesses over the 2-week hearing were Lakota and Dakota men and women elders, along with the younger American Indian movement leaders. Some of them were from Oklahoma, like Carter Camp, but most of them were from Pine Ridge. They each told the oral history of the 1868 treaty between the United States and the Great Sioux Nation, the territory of which was contiguous and covered a very large land base, including the Missouri River. At the end of the hearing, the elders asked me to edit the transcript into a book. I'm certain that Vine suggested it to them. I cursed him for the next 3 years as I worked on the 3,000-page court transcript to create what I called the book, The Great Sioux Nation, An Oral History of the Sioux People and Their Treaty. The federal judge presiding, Warren Urban, declined the motion to dismiss based on his own role in having to follow federal Indian law. He says, I'm not on your side. I work for the government. And he referred to the plenary power of Congress and admitted that we had no real recourses there for the treaty. he recommended that we go to an international body. This was the desired outcome. The International Indian Treaty Council had been founded by activists in the American Indian movement 6 months before the hearing, and already had decided to take the treaty to the United Nations, or look into where maybe the World Court, International Court of Justice, maybe the Inter-American Court for the Americas. So it was a couple of years of studying these things. So I began working with the Treaty Council in 1975, helping set up the San Francisco office and publication of a newsletter, Treaty Council News, which still exists. The main office was in New York, across from UN headquarters. But we did most of the publicity, helping organize Western Mississippi, and organizing people locally into, understanding what the Treaty Council was about. So we got a lot of support. The Treaty Council leaders worked, the ones in New York, spent a lot of time at the UN, working with international human rights NGOs and liberation movements, but they were mostly based in Geneva. And it's an interesting story why human rights got based in Geneva at UN headquarters. It was because when they were in New York in the 1950s, most of them were either African or Asian or Latin American. They were brown and black people, mostly. And they were constantly discriminated against in living in New York, and sometimes actually attacked. So they felt that their staff were not safe in New York and moved it to Geneva. So that's where we had to go to do all this work, it's where we still have to go to do this UN work. Treaty Council, the United Nations had offices, the offices in Geneva of Human Rights, Development, Disarmament, Refugees, and World Health Organization, the International Labor Organization, and other international bodies. So it turned out to be really good because we were able to network. There are Native people in all of those institutions now, going to all of those meetings and interjecting the indigenous people's issues. So the Treaty Council organized a 3-day conference at the United Nations in Geneva for September 1977. I didn't want to go. I actually didn't entirely agree with this work going on. I worked on it, but I had my doubts that it would go anywhere. Like most U.S. people, I said, well, the U.S. didn't support the UN, so it won't get anywhere. I was definitely proven wrong. So they insisted, you're a staff person. Of course, I wasn't being paid, but I did go with 4 or 5 others, especially I remember the late Fern Eastman. It's from Sisseton, really hard worker, and Bill Means, the only guy who was down there with us in the middle of the night, mimeographing. Does anyone not know what mimeographing? Documents. So no sleep for 10 days. There were 100 official indigenous delegates from the hemisphere. So this was the beginning of the Indigenous Caucus at the United Nations that lobbied for and obtained a working group on indigenous peoples in 1982 as a part of the UN Human Rights Commission. 1992, Rigoberta Menchú was given she worked with us all through the 80s with the Treaty Council. She was given the Nobel Peace Prize, and a World Conference on Indigenous People was set up, also an international day, UN Day for Indigenous Peoples, and an international year, which have been consecutive. I can't remember. I think we're in our 12th Indigenous Peoples Year. So the numbers participating in the meetings in Geneva, which included an annual 6 weeks meeting of the Human Rights Commission, to be there a long time, were very few in the beginning. Obviously, it was very expensive. We did have a huge, from the 77 conference, a huge support group in the Swiss community. So we always had couches to sleep on, and it was really not much money. There was no money at the time in foundations to fund this kind of work. We tried. None of them would do it. Now the Ford Foundation is begging Indigenous people's caucus to take money from them for their work, but not at that time. So I guess the highlight of that process was the establishment of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues at UN headquarters, because it is at UN headquarters that all the political matters take place, and we had to get there sometime, much harder. So it meets for 2 weeks annually, meets in April every year, and in 2014, the only time I've gone, I kind of retired from this work. Indigenous Peoples History came out, but I went to the Permanent Forum that year and also to the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, and there were 10,000 Indigenous people. But generally it's 1,000 to 3,000 every year. So here at UNM, my time as Native American Studies coordinator. So Native American Studies at UNM in 1978 when I arrived was 8 years after its establishment. But it was primarily involved, and of course the students established it, and it was primarily involved in Native student support. It was doing a I thought, very good job with that without much institutional support from the administration. But my task was to develop the academic element with a vision of future department status, which wonderfully now exists. So we had some support in the administration. Joel Jones became, he was in American Studies, and he became a dean. He would come to our meetings, and he would, he provided some funds, and Bud, what was his last name? The president at the time was not a very hands-on guy, so his assistants could do quite a lot on their own. And one assistant was Tony Hillerman. Yeah, he was. He's a journalism professor here at UNM, and the president tapped him as his public relations officer. So Tony Hillerman was very helpful. He just kind of did things and then went and told the president, and so, but that included Alfonso Ortiz and Sam Deloria and me and the All Indian Pueblo Council people and other Pueblos sending governors and Zuni and Mescalero insisting on meetings with the president, and it was very intimidating for him, I think. So we got a lot out of, that's a good idea, by the way, is take a whole delegation of really prestigious Native people and just sit there in the office and say, well, what are you going to do? Instead not begging. And I would have never been able to do any of that by myself, let me tell you. Of course, Alfonso was always there. Alfonso had left Princeton and was a professor in anthropology at UNM when I came, fortunately, and very involved and very supportive of the task. Other great supporters we had, some unexpected, thanks to, I'll talk more about Al Henderson, but thanks to Al, who got his degree in economics under Gerald Boyle, who was, not an activist at all. But Gerald was very helpful to us, and anthropology professor Luis Lamphere, and also especially math professor Richard Griego, who is an activist, Hispano from New Mexico. And so we were able to establish a research institute. So the Institute for Native American Development, INAD, as we called it, and organized a large conference inviting everyone, native and non-native, consultants, but especially economic development officers from reservations. Anyone who was working on the problems of native economic development on reservations and on, the dependency of fossil fuels. The Institute published books and reports on reservation economic development. Now, I was able to recruit, and it was not easy to get the late Larry Emerson to come and be the assistant director, assistant coordinator. He wasn't crazy about academia. He worked with the, what was in Navajo Community College at the Shiprock. But he thought it was worthwhile, and everything I say that happened here is, we were both doing it, and he was the soul of it. He would only stay 1 year. I really missed him the second year. He was around, I could consult him, but we without any money, we organized this conference, and you remember how many people came out? It must have been 400 or 500. We expected 50 people. We were having it at the Holiday Inn, conference. So I wanted to mention Al, and I want to ask him to stand up because I want to honor him for really being the Al teaches courses out at Denny College. I got to guest teach his class a couple of years ago. Great students learning about economics. And Al, especially the second year, well, all during this time, but the second year when we set up the program for training economic development officers on reservations, to come here, the tribes would pay them to come. They'd be on their salary coming. We made those arrangements. They would get credit if they ever wanted to use it in the economics department for it. Gerald Boyle was involved, but Al was really the person who designed it. And the other economist, of course, was United Nations economist that we found the first year, 1977, Lorraine Ruffing. Lorraine Ruffing is very interesting. She worked closely with us at volunteering her vacation time to come here. None of these UN people who came ever charged anything. She had written her Columbia University economics dissertation on Navajo Nation under development. I recommend, I think DNA students would be interested in this dissertation. Then she took various staff positions at the United Nations in Geneva and then New York headquarters. So she participated in teaching these courses. She and Al and Gerald Boyle and Phil Reno. Phil Reno. What I wanted to wrap up by telling you about the changes in the development and what I saw at the time is important. I thought it was important to start a Native American Studies Association. So at UNM, we began to form, we began that process with Ted Kaholo, Alfonso Ortiz, Simon Ortiz, Bahi Billy, and Dave Warren. We organized a 3-day roundtable. It's called the Roundtable of Native American Studies Directors, informing the Native American Studies Association. We held it at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. Good representation of directors of Native American Studies programs around the country participated, including Brian Deloria, who had established American Indian Studies at University of Arizona 2 years earlier. Jack Forbes from UC Davis, Charlotte Heath from UCLA, John Woolyard, who actually set up the first Native American Studies program ever, and that was at San Diego State. Still very strong there. Henrietta Mann from the University of Montana, Roberta Wilson, University of Washington, Russell Thornton and Gerald Wisner from the University of Minnesota. So we had quite a spread of directors and others. They weren't the only ones, there were others. So the entire 3 days of presentations and discussions were taped, some 20, 25 hours, tapes that may be somewhere on this campus, and I hope you'll find them, because I think it's very interesting. We did a little summary, just very, very brief summaries, but this is represents 20 hours of discussion. So that would be a really good thing to find and transcribe for posterity. And this little booklet, which is the report on it, is the only one I have. Other one, I have two. I'm going to give it to Tiffany for the department. I don't need it. It has the pictures of all the participants and kind of the cool. So, but it didn't come to me. We didn't form it there. We decided to reach out to others, and so 2 years later, a follow-up meeting was organized by Charlotte Heath at UCLA, and it also didn't gel. It just wasn't the time yet, I think. Because finally, in 1999, the American Indian Studies Association was founded at Arizona State University, and they probably didn't even know about what we had done. It's not like, oh, we're going to pick up on that. This is something completely new. So that was founded by, I had 20th birthday last year. And Picasso Review was established in 1985 by Elizabeth Cookland, and it's more or less the journal of the ASA now. So it was founded by Cookland and Roger Buffalohead and William Willard, who was Elizabeth Cookland's colleague at University of Washington, Pullman. It's now edited. The journal's edited by James Riding at ASU, and I think ASA moved over to UNM. Is it here now? It just goes back and forth, yeah. Well, a decade later, the Native American Studies, the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association was founded with a journal soon after. Conferences also, like ASA does. So now Native American Studies is acknowledged as a stable and still evolving academic field, I believe. A critical mass of Native Americans holding doctorate degrees and publishing in academic journals and prestigious university and trade presses is really stunning if you think about it. Just look at the University of Minnesota publications, University of North Carolina, really remarkable, University of Washington Press. Doctorate degrees in Native American Studies are offered at University of California, Davis and UC Berkeley. It's being developed at UC Washington, University of Washington, and hopefully UNM will outpace them and get a doctorate. So 23 years ago, Elizabeth Cookland wrote, Native American Studies as an academic discipline, if allowed or even encouraged to thrive in its original conception, she's referring back to that Princeton meeting, could become one of the useful mechanisms for the deconstruction of colonization, not only in academia, but in society as well. This deconstruction will take time and support and constant vigilance on the part of its practitioners, and it will require a post-colonial theorist that they come to grips with the realities of colonial domination in Indian-white relations in America. I think, and I expect that Dr. Cookland would agree, that Native American Studies at UNM has come closer to that goal, to the goal that she envisioned 23 years ago. University of New Mexico Native American Studies is, I believe, uniquely situated to be central to the future development of Native American Studies as a field. Surrounded by the most ancient indigenous communities that have survived in what is now the United States, Native American Studies at UNM has always, by far, had the largest number of Native students, a critical mass. Although the majority of the students and faculty are from the nations of the region, brilliant Native scholars, such as Nick Estes, are attracted to join UNM Native American Studies, even though UNM is not a prestigious Ivy League or land-grant institution. It also attracts Native students from other nations, indigenous nations. That's a great advantage to developing the most dynamic Native American Studies department in North America, if not the hemisphere. It also entails a great responsibility to those indigenous communities who entrust their youth to study here, and leadership requires responsibilities to the development of Native American Studies continentally, as well as the tribal colleges. And it's not just numbers or demography. Back to our attempt to form a Native American Studies Association, out of the 20 participants, only 6 were Pueblo, Dene, or Apache, but they were the ones, along with Vine Deloria Jr., who kept raising the importance of oral history and Native knowledge, which Dr. Greg Cajete is recognized as the foremost specialist and researcher on. This I didn't even know until I read this in Elizabeth Cook, one of her articles. Dr. Alfonso Ortiz, with his Princeton doctorate in anthropology, was the most adamant in his critique of archaeology and anthropology. He called his presentation The Responsibility of the Indian Scholar. It's worth going online and finding that and reading it. It's a powerful statement. He told a story of a recent experience he had at a symposium at the Hopi Cultural Center on Second Mesa. He said, and this was back in 1980, they invited a group of scholars who have written on the Hopi to come and make themselves available for questions concerning the connection of their work and with Hopi aspirations. One senior Anglo, they were all white, anthropologist, made the political mistake of speaking of Hopi origins, placing them in the Mojave Desert. When a Hopi asked him why he did not just accept what the Hopi say about their origins, he became very haughty and remarked, "Look, you're dealing in mythology, I'm dealing in science." Alfonso Ortiz continued, referring to the Bering Straits theory of the peopling of the Western Hemisphere. He said, in examining the relationship of anthropology to Native American studies and to the situation of Indian people in general, you have to begin with the archaeologists. In looking at their version, you get the impression that it was archaeologists who discovered and explored the New World, not Native people. Their lack of imagination, concern with chronology, stones, broken pottery, has little to do with the fact that if indeed Indian peoples did make such a journey over the Bering Straits, they made themselves over in 1,000 different ways. Their ongoing voices called the wilderness and above all honored the human spirit. He goes on, I find it worth considering, however, whether the journey took place at all. Why would an infinitely wise creator fashion such a world and leave half of the world off, unpopulated until 40,000 years ago? That's Alfonso Ortiz, the anthropologist. He goes on, the story of this journey is the story of Indian people, and they should tell it. We should take the play away from the archaeologists and tell the story of the migration we know about through our traditions and our languages. This is not just a problem of archaeologists' insensitivity to Indian beliefs. It is a matter of the wrong people telling the wrong story. Vine Deloria, of course, has since then written and gotten can't remember his name, but a great anthropologist write a whole book on it, denouncing the Bering Straits. And he always said, Vine always said, footprints went in both directions, and all along the whole hemisphere. So he has always cautioned, the best lesson I learned, very early on was from Vine, that always listen to the stories first. They probably won't be chronological. They may not be very specific. But if you listen well, you'll get the hint of where to go to do the research, how to do it. And that has served me well. Hearing also the stories at Acoma and of the Cherokees and Muskogee people from their writers who wrote in the 1920s and 30s about their origins and migrations coming up from Mesoamerica, bringing the sacred corn, as happened also here, bringing the corn from the mother birth of it. This formed the basis of the opening chapter of my book on Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, which I call Follow the Corn.
All right, let's give Roxane Dunbar Ortiz another round of applause. Thank you for tracing us back through that important, powerful, and beautiful history of how we came to be here in this space and who we owe, our ability to be here today too, which includes Roxane and all these other protagonists of Native existence and history. So we're going to open it up if anybody has any questions or comments. I think we have time for 2.
It was great to hear you talk, Brian Hudson from Central New Mexico Community College. I was wondering, I was really excited to hear before your talk about the HBO series based on your book. And I was wondering if, how much work they did with you in consulting and that sort of thing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's, I gave Melanie the shorter version of it, but it's an HBO series that uses 3 texts. Mine, Michelle Toyot's book, he's a Afro-Haitian historian, and Sven Beckhardt, Swedish, who wrote on genocide and saw the roots of Nazism in the U.S., the Lebensraum, the expansion. So the series is on colonial genocide, and it's Raoul Peck is the director and producer. He's Afro-Haitian. He did the James Baldwin I Am Not Your Negro last year, and documentaries on Lumumba, the young Karl Marx, other films. And he's based in Paris, and yes, from the very beginning, all 3 of us worked with him. The other 2 passed away before, and so it was mainly me working with him for the past, it's almost 2 years, June of 2018. I went and watched the four pieces. They had a lot of placeholders, that hadn't been filled in yet, but explained what it would be. And it really blew me away. He is a remarkable filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. He uses his own voice. He brings his own story into it. He starts it with, I'm from one of those shithole countries, Haiti. So it's also, it's a history, but it also, comes up in time. So I think it's going to be very powerful, and it's just amazing that his film, Not Your Negro, was nominated for the Academy Award. He's a very independent filmmaker and not a Hollywood person, but Hollywood came calling, offering him the sun and the moon, and I don't know, the next Star Trek or something, if he wanted it. And he didn't want any of that. But when HBO offered him a documentary series without any strings or, censorship, he took it. And so he has had total freedom with his film. And nothing, HBO did nothing. It's interesting, it's going to be the last docu-series that HBO does. I think they decided they're getting in a little too deep or something, but it will be out in September. I hope everyone will watch it. It also will probably be made into a 4-hour film that will go around. Well, I just wanted to end it, if no one else has a question, I had one more thing to say, the pressing issues. I would like to make this point, you can probably tell from what I spent a lot of time on. First of all, though, I think Native scholars are exploring the questions of settler colonialism. And one problem with settler colonialism studies is there's a kind of terminal narrative built into it, that is the termination of Native peoples, as if it was successful, rather than being an ongoing, not a historical thing, but an ongoing settler colonialism. So I think that work is going on and needs to really be nourished in students as well. But also international law should not be left to the lawyers, should not be left to the law school. It should be incorporated in Native American studies. There's a lot of transnational research and publication, you know, with New Zealand, with Canada, with the Hemisphere, with all indigenous peoples. But little, if any of it, takes in international human rights law, which includes the Genocide Convention. I really encourage you to think about that here at NAS UNM, of taking that up. You would be the very first Native American Studies program to do that. This is Glenna Martinez.
Yeah, hi everybody. I just want to thank you for the historical overview. I started here at UNM as an undergraduate in 1977, and all the years that you talked about all the different people, it was good to see. Al, I remember you were upperclassman when I was here. Kevin Gover, Robert Fasthorst, a number of those people from the law school, and it was a very different time. And Phil Reno, the late Phil Reno, was one of my professors. And I really appreciate the foundation that you set to really think critically about Native American studies, because it set a foundation for me to think about being a history teacher, which I eventually became and taught history, and now I'm a professor here. But just want to thank you for that work, because it's very important what you did. The series of books that you did on economic development were also important for me. But my question I have is, were you involved in working with the United Nations draft for Indigenous peoples, rights on Indigenous peoples?
Yes, well, we started that from 1977. We took a declaration on the rights of Native Americans, we called it then, to Geneva, to the UN conference. And we used that as a template to push for. The working group was, in part it was for testimony, like Rigoberta Menchu's testimony in 1982. The very first meeting of the working group was astounding. Her whole family had been killed in Guatemala. She was in exile and also hunted by Guatemalan military. And it was riveting. It really grounded the working group. So added to its mission because of that was having testimony of, you know, atrocities that we might be able to help stop or publicize, whatever. Brazil, at that time, Native people were not considered human in Brazil. They didn't get acknowledged as human until 1980. And white men killed an Amazonian, a Yanomami, and he was put on trial for it because it was now a crime to kill an Indian. And he got off because he said he didn't know about the law. So that's how bad it was at the time. Yeah, so we started having to negotiate. We had kind of free play and, you know, pushing the declaration through, but then at a certain point, it had to get to the states. That meant it had to go to committee, the Social and Economic Committee of the General Assembly in New York, And that's basically then when we built that institution, the Permanent Forum in New York, to be able to negotiate all the time. So the United States was the main barrier. We had Reagan all through the 80s, but Clinton wasn't much better, and dissuading us from having, words like sovereignty, words like peoples. There was a period of time in the early 2000s when Native people who knew about this were demonstrating with nothing but a sign with an S on the end. Because peoples in international law means nations. People just means random people. And they wanted to use populations or people. So these little things make a difference, It's the difference between being a nation with sovereign, the right to self-determination, or being random people who should have human rights. So we really fought for that. Did get it into the Declaration. We didn't get everything, but it's still the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples did pass the General Assembly in 2007. United States, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada opposed it, but it was, it goes by majority vote in the General Assembly. It's not the Security Council. They don't have a veto. And they were so embarrassed being alone because they had twisted a lot of arms. They thought they had gotten several African countries and several other countries to join them, and they didn't. Some of them abstained. So they looked so foolish that they all each changed it and ratified it. And of course, Obama came in 2008, and he made one of his campaign promises. I think he had a campaign headquarters in Navajo Nation, and he promised that he would do the executive order and sign it, and he did. So it's now universal. It's just like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a powerful instrument. It doesn't take necessarily a covenant or a treaty to be international law. If it becomes common law, international common law is called jus cogens. And so that's really what it's coming to be. And, anyone can recognize it. Like NAS could say, we acknowledge and accept the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous. The city of Albuquerque could do it. The state of New Mexico, judges, tribal judges in their decisions could include it. So that's the only way it will come to be powerful and have the force of international law that will really have teeth and can take things to the World Court, stuff like that. So those are activist things that people can really do anywhere, anytime. Your favorite basketball team, anyone can recognize it, say we recognize this. Almost all of the liberal churches have acknowledged the Declaration. Well, thank you very much again, and we'll have this wonderful roundtable coming up